Before we begin today's story, I want to ask you for a small favor. If you enjoy emotional stories that stay with you long after the video ends, stories about relationships, difficult choices, and moments that quietly change our lives, then take a second to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life. Now, let me tell you about the moment that almost changed my marriage forever. But to understand what happened, we need to go back to a time when everything in my life looked completely fine from the outside. From the outside, our marriage looked stable. In fact, many people would probably describe it as ideal. My husband and I had built a life together that most couples would be proud of. We had a comfortable home, predictable routines, and a calm rhythm to our days. Nothing dramatic ever happened between us. No shouting matches. No slam doors. Just quiet stability. We woke up early, went to work, came home, shared dinner, and talked about everyday things. Bills, work schedules, family gatherings, plans for the weekend. On the surface, it seemed like the kind of life many people spend years trying to build. And for a long time, I believed it too. I told myself we were happy, or at least happy enough. But what I didn't realize at the time was that sometimes the calmest lives can hide the quietest problems. Because stability can sometimes become silence. And silence can slowly turn into distance. The distance between us didn't appear overnight. There wasn't a single moment where everything suddenly broke apart. Instead, it started with small things. Almost invisible things. Little moments that didn't seem important at the time. We began spending more evenings in separate rooms. He would sit in the living room watching television, or scrolling through his phone while I stayed in the bedroom finishing work or reading. At first, it felt harmless. After all, couples need space sometimes. But slowly, those separate evenings started happening more often. Our conversations also changed. We still talked every day, but the things we talked about became smaller, more practical. Instead of asking each other how we felt, we asked what needed to be done tomorrow. Instead of sharing thoughts and emotions, we shared reminders. Did you pay the electricity bill? What time is your meeting tomorrow? Don't forget we're visiting my parents on Sunday. None of these conversations were negative. But something important was missing. Connection. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't understand then. Marriages rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They usually fade quietly. Slowly. So slowly that sometimes you don't even realize it's happening. There's one evening I remember very clearly. At the time it felt ordinary. But now I see it differently. We were sitting across from each other at the dining table. Dinner was simple that night. I can't even remember what we were eating. What I do remember is the sound of the television in the background. It was playing in the living room, filling the silence that had settled between us. There was a time when that silence would have been filled with laughter, stories from work, random thoughts, playful arguments about movies or politics. But that night, we barely spoke. My husband looked exhausted. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and his eyes looked tired. I probably looked the same. After a few quiet minutes, I finally asked him something simple. Are you okay? He didn't look up right away. Just work, he said after a moment. And that was it. No follow-up question. No explanation. No curiosity about my day either. We finished dinner quietly. At the time, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. People get tired. Work gets stressful. Life gets busy. But now I realize that moment represented something deeper. Because distance in a relationship rarely begins with anger. It begins with indifference. Weeks slowly turned into months. Life continued the way it always had. We still did everything responsible couples do. We paid our bills on time. We attended family gatherings. We smiled in photographs. From the outside, nothing about our marriage looked broken. But inside the quiet routine of our home, something delicate was slowly cracking. It wasn't dramatic enough for anyone else to notice. But I could feel it. I began to feel strangely invisible in my own home. Not rejected. Not unloved. Just unseen. And there's a difference. When someone doesn't see you completely, something inside you begins to change. You start questioning things you never questioned before. You wonder if maybe this is just how marriage works after a certain number of years. Maybe excitement fades. Maybe emotional connection fades too. Maybe adulthood simply replaces romance with routine. These were the thoughts I told myself whenever the silence between us felt heavier than usual. This is normal, I would think. Long relationships go through phases. Real love is about stability, not excitement. And for a while, those explanations helped me ignore the feeling growing quietly inside me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't quite right. I just didn't know how serious it would become. The truth didn't arrive in a dramatic way. There were no arguments. No sokking discoveries. No broken trust. Instead, it appeared on an ordinary afternoon that almost didn't happen. One day after work, I stopped at a small cafe near my office. It wasn't a place I visited often. But that day, I felt unusually tired and needed a few minutes before going home. Not physically tired. Emotionally tired. I ordered a coffee and sat near the window, watching people walk past outside. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was alone with my own thoughts. Not someone's wife. Not someone's daughter. Not someone responsible for keeping everything running smoothly. Just me. I wasn't searching for anything. I wasn't expecting anything either. But life sometimes brings unexpected moments exactly when we least anticipate them. As I sat there quietly drinking my coffee, I suddenly heard someone say my name. I looked up. Standing a few feet away from my table was someone I hadn't seen in years. Daniel. An old acquaintance from long ago. At first, I almost didn't recognize him. But when he smiled, the familiarity instantly returned. "Wow, it's been a long time," he said warmly. He looked genuinely happy to see me. We exchanged a few quick updates about life. Where we were working. How long it had been since we last saw each other. What we had been doing with our lives. Eventually he asked if he could sit for a few minutes. I hesitated briefly, but there was nothing strange about the situation. He was just an old acquaintance. So I agreed. Our conversation started simply. We talked about careers, responsibilities, and how quickly adulthood seems to arrive. We laughed about how different real life feels compared to what we imagined when we were younger. For a while, the conversation felt light and comfortable. Just two people catching up. But then Daniel asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. A simple question. One that people ask all the time. Yet somehow, it felt different in that moment. He looked at me calmly and said, "Are you happy?" Without thinking, I laughed lightly. "Of course," I replied automatically. It was the answer people expect. The answer we give without really thinking. But Daniel didn't laugh with me. He just looked at me quietly. Not in an uncomfortable way. Not in a romantic way. Just attentively. "You don't sound very convinced," he said gently. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Something about the way he asked the question made it difficult to brush off. And suddenly, I realized something surprising. I didn't actually know how to answer honestly. Was I unhappy? No. My life wasn't terrible. My marriage wasn't abusive. There were no obvious problems. But was I truly fulfilled? That answer was much harder. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure anymore. Our conversation eventually ended the way most casual conversations do. We finished our coffee. We wished each other well. And we went our separate ways. But the question Daniel asked stayed in my mind long after I left the cafe. Not because of him, but because of what the question revealed inside me. That evening when I returned home, everything looked exactly the same. My husband was sitting on the couch scrolling through his phone. The kitchen needed attention. Dinner needed to be prepared. Life continued exactly as it always had. But something inside me had shifted. I began noticing things I hadn't fully noticed before. How often we avoided meaningful conversations. How quickly emotional topics were dismissed. How easily we accepted the word fine as a complete answer. And slowly, I began realizing something uncomfortable. Maybe the distance in our marriage wasn't as small as I had been pretending. Sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that save us. Today I chose honesty and it changed everything.